Namaste. Thank you for tuning in this morning for Conquering the Corporate World. My name is Ashika, and I am pleased to welcome you to the Hindu Experience Students Edition 2020. The National Hindu Students Forum UK was founded in 1991 with a vision to bring students together to protect, preserve, and practice and promote Hindu dharma. Today, NHSF UK societies across the country keep this vision alive. This conference, the Hindu Experience Students Edition 2020, is a celebration of Hindu identity and how dharmic values can be integrated in everyday life to build a better world. Today, we are here to explore how leaders in the corporate world have excelled in their industries and how Hindu dharma and culture has grounded them as well as helped propel their careers. For this discussion, I have the pleasure of talking to two very successful Hindu women in their fields. First up, we are joined by Devyani ji Vaishampayan. With a degree in physics and electronics and then going on to obtain an MBA, Devyani ji went on to become a multi-sector and international senior HR director for companies like Rolls-Royce and investment bank Citi. Since then, she has been featured in the 2017 Financial Times Ethnic Minorities Leaders List, and in 2016, the FTSE 100 Women to Watch list by Cranefield Business School. Now she's the managing director of HR Tech Partnership, an innovation and investment venture in digital HR startups. We are also joined today by Janhavi Dadarkar. By background, she is a corporate media lawyer and has worked in the city with clients such as Richard Branson, Warner Brothers on Harry Potter, and on setting up the IPL with Sony and Sachin Tendulkar. She is now the CEO of advisory firm Maiora that advises on governance, strategy, and risk. Janhavi also holds various non-executive director positions, including chair of global fintech company, and she was the first and still is the only Hindu to be on the board of examiners at IOD and now heads the IOD faculty for their governance programs. She's also one of NHSF UK's founding members and the second president of NHSF UK. Devyani ji, Janhavi ji, welcome to the Hindu Experience Students Edition 2020.
Thank you, Ashika.
Thank you. Namaste.
Excellent. If you have any questions you would like to have answered by Devyani ji or Janhavi ji, please ask them via our YouTube live chat. We will be coming back to these after this discussion. So I want to get straight into this discussion, and to start off, what I'd really like to hear from you both is about your journeys from your times as students to who you are today. So Janhavi ji, if you could open up the floor for us and tell us what inspired you to pursue this sphere and your career.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me again. I always enjoy my discussions with NHSF because one of the things I will say is, yes, I'm very proud of what I've done in the corporate world, but I think one of the biggest moments of pride for me is to see what NHSF is up to, because when you set something up, it's the legacy that for me is so important. And so that's one of my biggest pride moments, I suspect, is seeing how you guys are flourishing and doing everything. My story is quite simple. As a young child, I used to like talking, I used to like arguing, I used to like debating. And so everybody was always, oh, Janhavi, you'll make a great lawyer, you'll make a great lawyer. So for me, the path was sort of pretty much embedded into my head that this is something that you need to do. And my parents were first generation over here. They were both medics, but they had no idea about the education system here in UK or anything. So they were pretty much, whatever you want to do, Janhavi, just do it. And I probably would have argued with them if they said something else anyway. So I just went into law. But one of the things right from sort of a young age that I enjoyed was my identity. And I loved the connection to India through my Hindu spiritual beliefs, etc. And I loved what India stood for. So one of the things I wanted to do when I went to university is I actually wanted to study Hindi. So it's not my mother tongue, but I wanted to learn it properly from a literature perspective. So I actually studied law with Hindi at SOAS and got to do a lot of comparative laws. And for all of you that think learning your mother tongue or anything like that is a disadvantage, I can tell you I got more offers for training contracts than my peers in the Oxbridge or other places. So in the end, I ended up at Denton's, which is one of the sort of, I think it's the world's largest now law firm. But part of it was luck, part of it was how I chose my path, and I ended up in corporate media and ended up with some fantastic clients, did some really fun stuff. But having done it for the city and having done it in a legal firm, I wanted to do something a bit different. And then I worked in my own firm with Manoj Ladha, who was also founder of NHSF. But we did a lot more with India, and we wanted to help UK corporates going into India and Indian corporates coming into the West. So for me, and after that, I got quite a lot of offers just to be a non-executive director, and the IOD had sort of headhunted me for the Board of Examiners. And since then, I've liberated myself from the legal sphere, so I'm not a practicing lawyer, but I still like to do things legally. So I give people guidance. I'm not allowed to give legal guidance, but I try not to give illegal advice. So that's my story.
Thank you, Janhavi ji. I love what you said about your Hindu identity there. Devyani ji?
So I grew up in Mumbai in what I would consider as a middle class but an educated family, where the emphasis on a good education is very high. So we are 4 sisters, and all of us have gone on to do our master's or a PhD. And I think that's the ethos that was instilled in us, to make sure you study well, but also you work hard, but more importantly, you excel in whatever you do. So I did a degree in physics. At that time, in India, if you were bright, I think you were expected to study science, which is what I did. But I was always quite interested in business. And I was very lucky because my father at that time, even 35 years ago, guided me very well to do an MBA immediately. So I finished my MBA, started work, and then worked for Citi at that time. And then went on to AT&T and became the Chief Human Resource Officer for India when I was just 32. So I was probably one of the youngest CHROs in India at that time. And during this time, I also trained to be a behavioral scientist. So I think what has served me well is I have probably a good grounding in both science, technical science, in business, as well as behavioral sciences, which I think helps me have quite an integrated outlook towards anything I do. While I was the CHRO for AT&T in India, I applied and was surprised, but managed to get the Chevening Scholarship, which is given by the British Council. Now, this was for senior Indian managers, and obviously it was very competitive because the British Council was willing to pay 3 months stay as well as the whole program cost at the Leeds Business School. So 10 of us were selected for that. And I came down here, leaving my husband and my 5-year-old daughter behind. So I guess I met my husband while I was at university. And I think one of the reasons why I've had such a successful career is the great support that he's always given me, along with, of course, my daughters. I came here, and then my husband has lived here in the UK when he was young. So this was in a way not unfamiliar to him. And when I was offered a very exciting role with Lucent AT&T here, I decided to move down from India. So we all came down here. And then subsequently, over the next 20 years, I've done a number of large senior HR director roles in global businesses, and such as Rolls-Royce, British Gas. My last role was the British Standards Institute as the Group HR Director. So I think I've been incredibly lucky because I've managed to, I've done handle HR for North America, for South America, for the Middle East, Asia Pacific and Middle East. Also, as a family, we've moved and we've lived in Singapore because of my job. We've lived in China. So I think the variety of experiences I've had, but also working for organizations where change, transformation was a constant, has been a very exciting part of the journey for me. Yeah. And what I do today is another big shift. We focus on artificial intelligence and digital innovative startups in the HR space or people management space. And we do 2 things: manage an angel investment fund that invests in these startups, but we also run a human capital digital innovation hub, which helps corporates experiment and engage with these startups. So again, a big shift, but I think one of the things I've always believed in is constant learning and reinventing yourself. And of course, I think the opportunities today to do that are very high. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Devyani ji. There was some amazing words of wisdom at the end there, and throughout. So Devyani ji, you said that you moved around a lot, and Janhavi ji, you said you've held on to your Hindu identity. So picking on that actually, Janhavi ji, if you could say, so in your professional life, to what extent have you used these Hindu beliefs and principles?
So for me, the first starting point for me is my identity as a Hindu. There's a personal aspect to it, but there's a holistic aspect that is integrated into everything I do. And I think I feel very fortunate that I am Hindu. So unlike other religions where they talk about it as a way of life, for me, actually, it's an attitude to a way of life. I noticed at the beginning we had Sundar Pichai's quote about it's not people that think something's not going right in life, but actually it's the attitude makes your life right. And I think that is what really I've integrated into everything that I do, in anything I do. It's about how I think about something. And I do think we have a different way of looking on it, because for me, what Hinduism has taught me is it is about exactly what Devyani ji said, constant learning. The search for the truth is what Hinduism is about for me. And so even in my corporate life, actually, I think that fits really well with everything I do, particularly now with governance and sustainability. Everything we talk about, actually, to me, is already there in the word dharma. If people could understand the word dharma, we wouldn't need about 10 different English words to explain it. So for me, it's sort of a guiding light to how I think on everything I do. It doesn't have to be overt. It can be overt at times, but it's one where the biggest one I would say that sort of on a daily basis I get questioned on, and I'm quite clear where I stand on it, is just as simple as, oh, Janhavi, can we call you Jan? Janhavi's too hard to say. And I'm like, no, my name is Janhavi. And not everybody will come to the same conclusion, so I'm not judging people on that. But I'm proud of my identity. And people did say to me a long time ago, if you change your name, Jan, you'll get lots more applications and lots more interviews. And I'm sure Devyani ji will tell you about this, but there's an incredible stat that there are more Johns on the FTSE listed companies as directors than there are women. And so jokingly, I used to say I could change my name to Janhavi and maybe I'll get more of the FTSE board positions. But for me, it's important. And actually, I think when people start recognizing your identity, they actually start respecting you more for it. So for me, not giving up my own values has been a big part of my success.
Thank you, Janhavi ji. I think respect forms a very, very core part of our identity in the corporate world. Devyani ji, obviously you've worked in different sectors, you've worked in different countries. What's your take on this?
So I think personally for me, my religion and my beliefs have always been a very private matter and a very family matter. But it's obviously, I think, particularly, with the growing up and with my parents' influence, I think where it's really had an impact is my values and my beliefs. I think I forgot to mention that even when my second daughter was born, I actually took a year off and I was down in India with her, and I actually trained to be a woman priest, and not because I wanted that as a vocation or a career, but it gave me an opportunity to explore, I think, our religion, our rituals, our beliefs, and all that a little more. So for me, it's been really about going to some of the core depths. And I think a few applications that I have been able to apply successfully, either in my career or the way I have grown as an individual, is I think firstly is the concept of ego. I think we all know Hinduism is all about, how do you really manage your ego and not let it overtake you. And particularly, I think working with senior leaders in an environment where a lot of them are male, and when the ego is, and you see the dysfunctional behaviors, whether it is not being objective, whether it is about misuse of power. Um, I think what Hinduism has helped me also is to make sure that I don't fall into that trap. And of course, it's always a lifelong exercise. You can never say you've done it, but I think a focus on selflessness, on karma, on good behavior, because I genuinely believe that it brings you good, but I think it also makes you a much better leader if you believe in that. I think the second aspect really has been the reinforcing my sense of personal integrity, because again, I think this is what Hinduism teaches you. And again, a good leader is one who's authentic, but who holds, I think if you hold yourself to the same standard as what you would expect out of your team or your colleagues, you become a far better leader. So for me, that's the second aspect of Hinduism I think I have tried to incorporate, particularly in my corporate life. And I think finally, from a functional perspective, as a senior HRD, my role has been about developing leadership capability. And actually, if you look at our scriptures, there's always been an emphasis on doing that in a thoughtful, but in a planned manner, and especially the use of mentors. So if you look at the Mahabharata, you had Krishna, who was advising Arjun constantly. If you look at Indian princes, I think there was a very planned process wherein it was about instilling the right behaviors, values, and it wasn't just pushing them into the role. So I do see a strong link between that and what organization and leaders and how they need to be developed in today's world.
So you mentioned there about being in a male-dominated sphere, and it's not an unknown fact that men, it's a high proportion of men in leadership positions. So I'd actually like to pick on that. So what are the challenges have you faced, Devyani ji, of being a Hindu woman in the corporate world?
Well, firstly, if I look back on my career, I think except for my last role where we were two women on the exec team, I've invariably been the only woman and the only Indian. So in a way, I think probably I've never really seen myself as a Hindu woman, but it's been primarily Indian and woman, and some of the stereotyping that has happened because of that. And to begin with, and of course, I don't come from the UK. My accent is still very Indian. So, I think all that is also something I've had to overcome. But to be honest, I've never let it bother me. But of course, I think there has been an underestimation of the educational background that I bring in, and therefore the intellectual rigor and ability, which probably doesn't get understood. The second is, of course, in terms of style, I've had to adapt my style quite a bit because when you are in a very male executive team, you have to be seen as more assertive. If you're quiet, it gets misunderstood. So I think adapting my influencing style has been important. I guess the third thing has also been around, it has been not been as easy. A lot of, especially at senior levels, I think the networking and the bonding becomes really important. And when you have a team that's very male, invariably it's talk about rugby or football, or it's about going to the pub, or even if it's team away days, it's events like go-karting, which I'm always rubbish at. And so you have to overcome a lot of that and yet be seen as someone who counts. Clearly, we all grow, we all learn, and we all adapt, which I've had to do. But the other thing I've had to do is, because I've worked in so many different cultures and had to influence exec teams in those countries, there's also been that level of adaptation. So I still remember Saudi Arabia, for example. In one of my previous jobs, I was looking after Asia Pac and Middle East, which had 300,000 employees. 80,000 were in Saudi Arabia, which meant I had to visit there. But the instant I got off from the plane, I had to put the burqa on. And trying to be in a position of authority when you have those kind of strictures does make it more challenging. But again, there's always a way out.
I love that. I truly love that. Janhavi, obviously you've worked in a separate sector. Would you like to say anything on this topic?
So as a woman, I totally agree with everything Devyani ji says. There's been times where you go into a room and actually I was the senior most lawyer in the room, but all the other men at the end of the meeting, they turned around and said, oh, would you like to go now? Because they thought I was the secretary, and would you like to make tea? Despite having done all the legal work, and actually it was quite funny because my boss turned around and goes, if she's going home, there's nothing else to say because she knew everything. So I think the point that Devyani ji mentioned about mentors or anything like that, one of the things I think in the corporate world that's really important for anybody is having the right sponsors that actually give you that boost when things are going wrong. And I suppose that's one of the values that I've learned as well now. I really want to be a sponsor for other people that needs that help. And I think it's important that we all put ourselves in that position, that we help each other. I think the big criticism of Indians, there used to be this joke, if one Indian tries to jump out of the well, another Indian will pull them down. I hope, and I genuinely believe things aren't like that anymore. I do think there's a lot more unity amongst us, and hopefully one of the things I will say I've seen change is a growing confidence in our Hindu youth to be proud of their identity and help each other out. And I think what Devyani ji said about networking, one of the big reasons for having NHSF or City Hindu networks, all of those things, is that you shouldn't feel like just because you can't do what everyone else does, that we can't create networks. So I think it's really important to have all of those things, and not just, by the way, for Hindu society. I think that's good for a diverse, sophisticated society in UK, and it leads to better decision making when you have that diversity of thought. Thank
you. So moving on from this then, Janhavi, this is for you. So at a more micro level, given that you were an advocate for the legal system based on Western concepts, were there any ethical or moral dilemmas for you as a Hindu?
So it's a really interesting question because there's a lot of people, I think increasingly there is a big focus now on what we say for corporates in the governance realm. We talk about purpose and values. And I think, I wish that it didn't have to come after sort of 3 decades of scandals where people didn't understand it. And I think even with this lockdown, we're going to see a lot of scandals coming post this lockdown on values. And so for me, a big part of what I wanted to do when I studied the law and what I wanted to do when I went into the legal sphere was actually, I want to be someone that has integrity, and I want to be based on purpose and values. And there were corporates that were doing things that were my clients that is not necessarily how I would have done it. And when you're a junior, it was really difficult to say things. Interestingly, we used to, I was going to say it's Chatham House rules, but given this is on YouTube, I suppose it can't be Chatham House rules. But there was a really interesting thing. At Christmas time, we used to have Christmas parties, and one of the things that used to happen and it wasn't uncommon in the city for things like this to happen, but one of the things that used to happen was if you wanted to celebrate and you wanted to, do everything, all the trainees had to sit on the lap of one of the partners who was dressed up as Father Christmas. And it was something that just, in this day and age, I don't think we would see it because of the whole Me Too movement and everything like that. But I can tell you in the 80s and 90s, the city was rife with stories like this. And there's still, things happening like that. And I remember I just refused to do it. I didn't make a value judgment on those that did it. But I think about it now and I just think maybe I should have raised my voice and actually said something more then. And it's easy to say with the benefit of hindsight, but I think what that did teach me is not, to raise my voice as and when I think something isn't right with my values. So it was much more a soft issue around values, I think, rather than specifically this law is right or that law is wrong. And it's something that I think you might get in any sector. But what I will say is increasingly corporates are recognizing that actually values and purpose is what gives your brand more value. And we can see that with all the social change agendas that are being launched and reflected in corporate policies. The only thing I will say to that is I hope it doesn't become just a branding thing. I hope there is real true change in values. And we should be part of that movement to make sure it's true values that are holistic and universal, not just very specific. And the best example I can give about that is, for me, Hindu dharma doesn't just talk, well, we don't talk about equality, we talk about fairness, we talk about equity. And there is a big difference between fairness, equity versus equality. So that concept is one that I think hopefully more and more people, society at large, should understand.
Okay, thank you, Janhavi. Actually, that was really interesting to hear your experiences, especially of, I guess, a different time. It feels like a completely different era now. So thank you for that. Devyani, do you have any experiences working in a range of different countries, such as what Janhavi mentioned?
No, I think the point that Janhavi made about purpose and values, I think is extremely important. And I overall, I think there are a few things happening now which are really changing the landscape. Of course, you referred to the Me Too movement that's there, but generally, I think organizations and corporates' awareness about inclusion and diversity, and interestingly, not just about diversity, but inclusion. And I think there's a big difference between the two. So that's going up. So there's a far greater level of awareness around that. I think the recent crisis particularly has shown that leaders need to be far more authentic. I mean, and of course, with meetings happening in living rooms and bedrooms, I think leaders have felt far more comfortable bringing their own natural self in. And in general, therefore, that is going to create an environment of more transparency. But equally, I think things like social media, the use of digital, it again means that particularly senior leaders or managers can't hide behind, and a lot of it is coming to the front. So I think there are several different forces that are making it far easier to be more of themselves, and I think that's therefore good for all of us who want to have identities that don't fit into traditional identities then.
Thank you. So we're now going to take a pause and we're now going to move on to the audience questions. So our first question comes from Sagar Galani. He asks, did you ever feel pressure to succumb to the ways of the corporate world and let go of dharmic values? And if so, how did you deal with this?
I can take that. I see a difference between values and some of the norms that were expected. And as long as the norms didn't clash with my values, I was, I guess, somewhat adaptable to the norms. And I think I've given examples of, the kind of networking that was expected, which probably I wouldn't have liked to do. But if that meant that it gave me access to some informal conversations with colleagues, that was fine. But values is a completely different thing. And for me, I think particularly some of my core values, whether that's integrity, whether that's a belief in being fair, a few other things, if it was an organization that I felt was not aligned, clearly I didn't stay. But a big part, I think, of what you do when you want to join an organization is focus on also having a good understanding of the values. It's not just about the brand, the money, the role. All those are important, but I think all of us have to pay equal attention to what does the organization really believe in. And there are always signs you can pick up. So it's not that difficult, or you can do some homework around it. But that's something I would advise everyone to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great question from Saga. I'm sure all of us have what we call dharma sankat. It's the whole Bhagavad Gita is written on this, and it's, you know, in any of our lives we will have moments where there is something that we think personally, would I want to do this? But what you have to do is try and take an overall holistic view. You know, it's really difficult to say every single situation which way to behave, but understanding what swadharma is against what universal dharma is as well, and understanding where you sit in all of that. So we always have dilemmas. I mean, as women, as mothers, do I, you know, spend, I mean, there were days when I would be in the office till 3 o'clock in the morning and my baby's at home, you know, and I went with my second child, I went back to work straight away. And the amount of guilt I felt sometimes when, you know, I wasn't there for pickup or something like that. But in the overall grand scheme of things, I feel my kids have actually gained from that. And in some ways, that's where I also think we're really fortunate coming from the culture we come from. I was very fortunate. My mum and dad were around and they were happy to look after the kids. So actually the kids probably got better upbringing with my parents than if I'd have been there straight after work getting angry at them. So there are always moments where we have balancing acts to do. And I think in those moments in times, being able to talk to people, being able to sort of learn from other people's experiences, and trying to take the longer term view, the bigger picture, because in that moment in time, there is a lot of pressure just to do something. What I would say to students is sometimes take a pause. Don't feel you have to make immediate decisions on all of these things and go with the peer group. Take a pause. And if you can do that, sometimes things become clearer when you see that actually there's a lot more people in the same position that you are, and you don't have to do what the group just surrounding you are doing. So that's what I would say. For me, there were lots of challenging situations, lots of times where I had to decide, should I do this, shouldn't I do that? And other people may have decided something differently, but understanding the context you're in is really important.
Thank you. I think that was a really good point about swadharma versus the universal dharma. I think that's something that we can definitely take away into our everyday lives. So the next question comes from Rahil Shah. He says, so Devyani ji, you mentioned constant learning. What is the correct balance between learning about different fields and becoming a specialist in one field? And how do Hindu values play into this?
So I think that's really a great question, because given the level of the speed of change that's happening nowadays, I think one of the key core skills everyone needs to have is to try and understand, you know, how do you need to keep pace, but also there are a completely new range of opportunities coming up. So how do you make use of those opportunities? And you can't do that if you come with the mindset that, oh, I've done my degree, this is my job, then that's it for the next 30 years. Now I can continue being on the same track. Clearly, the question was about balance. And I think the great thing about Hinduism is everything is a balance, isn't it? I think who you are, your duty towards yourself, your family versus society. I think every aspect is about dualism. It's about balance. So, and I think you need to have the same approach when it comes to your career and the skills that you need. All I would say is there's also an element of a good understanding of where things are going. So if I was advising someone who's young today, I would say, you know, probably as compared to the last 30, 40 years, where your core technical hard skills were more valued, where we are now heading is an environment where, yes, I think the world is going digital. So clearly skills such as digital AI are going to be very important, but the emphasis on what used to be soft skills is going up even more. So whether it's creativity, whether it's innovation, whether it's communication, whether it's influencing, you have to be equally or much better at that too. And then, of course, the important thing is to be passionate about what you're doing, because without that passion, without that engagement, you're never going to be successful.
I totally agree with Devyani ji. I think that depth versus breadth. You need a balance of that, even in a boardroom. Individually, though, choose what you enjoy. And if you do something that you're passionate about, you'll be successful at it. I think the Malcolm Gladwell's book it talks about 10,000 hours. So if you want to be an outlier, you have to be an expert. And to be an expert, you have to have done 10,000 hours in one specific field. And to do 10,000 hours is difficult if you really look at it. So it really depends what fields you're going into. But I think for the generations coming through, that there's talk that, you know, you'll probably go through 5 different career changes in your lifetime. So it's a very different world, certainly to what my parents grew up in and what I grew up in. So my roles evolved. But one of the things that I always had as a core, for me, specializing in company law was a good foundational base, and becoming a real expert in that. I don't necessarily have to use that every day, but people know if I come out with something, my base will always be there. So for me, the depth in one subject used to create a breadth of knowledge in other sectors is where I found it useful.
Yeah, and I think, just to again give a specific example, just as Janhavi G has done, I think, you know, my core area of expertise now has been in people management in large complex businesses. But I think what I now do is I've used that, but I'm now focusing on AI and investment, but associated with that. And so I think in terms of understanding the need, what would be a good solution, I can bring that to the table. I'm also a board director in a couple of businesses, and there again, my knowledge of people, culture, governance around that comes in useful. So I think have a core base, but there's also lots of different ways then you can shape your career as you go along and as you grow and mature then.
Thank you very much. So this brings us to an end of the Q&A, but of course, I'm sure if you reach out to Devyani Ji and Janhavi Ji on LinkedIn, they'll be happy to answer your questions for all of those questions that have come through, but we haven't got around to them. So as we come to the end of this discussion, I'd like some closing remarks from both of you. So my question really is, what would you advise to the current generation who want to work in this global corporate world and also retain their Hindu identity at the same time? So Devyani Ji, if you'd like to start on that one.
So I think my key advice for anyone who's young, and of course I have daughters and one who's still at university, is be curious and take risks. You know, I think it's very easy to kind of, particularly with I think social media nowadays, is to be in a bit of a cocoon of people you like, things you want, and I think that makes you lose touch with opportunities, with what's happening, but also figuring out where the world is going. So, you know, and that doesn't mean you lose your identity, but I think there's also, you can take your identity much further if you're able to be more open, diverse, take risks and be more curious rather than being limited in what you do.
That's really interesting. Janhavi Ji, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I suppose as my closing remarks, what I would say to all of you is that spirit of inquiry is something that the Hindu Dharma encourages. Go out and learn, you know, really study something, really take time to understand it. Talk to people that disagree with you sometimes to see what they think. Understand where different perspectives are coming from. My core faith and core belief is based on, actually, I have studied comparative religions and I've studied comparative law. And for me, that gave me a deeper insight into what I want to believe. And I've come to it from the basis of, not because my parents told me or because somebody else told me or the priest told me, you've got to go and do this. I've learned what the science behind it is, and that has convinced me to do something. So do study that, because I have true faith that actually, if you really study it, a lot of the answers are there in our philosophy already. But it takes time, and it takes that spirit of inquiry to do it. And I suppose that, sort of the words that I always say to students, I think Swami Vivekananda said, arise, awake, and stop not until your goal is reached. Be dedicated towards your goals, and really, first of all, waken yourselves up, arise. We need to do that, not just as individuals, but I genuinely believe the world needs people like those that have true integrity and true good values to raise their voices in these times. We've got all sorts of things happening around the world at the moment, where if good people with good values, sustainable values, were out there raising their voices. So yeah, arise, awake, and stop not.
Thank you both. I'm sure all of us are very inspired after this whole discussion, and even more by your closing remarks. So I'm going to leave this discussion here. And I would like to thank you both. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you both for joining us today and discussing how Hindu dharma and culture has grounded corporate leaders as well as helped propel their careers. I hope you all at home watching this have enjoyed the session and have taken some wisdom away from this discussion, and hopefully you can incorporate this into your lives and your careers to come. As I mentioned at the start of this session, this is just one session hosted by NHSF UK at the Hindu Experience Students Edition 2020. Do join us throughout the weekend for more panels, workshops, and spotlight conversations. Please visit www.nhsf.org.uk/these2020 to see what else we have coming up today. Pranam and Namaste.